question for everybody. How many people in this room watch television? Okay, the rest of you are liars, right? That's the better question. How many people in this room can remember a positive portrayal of a Bible-believing Christian on television? I actually racked my brain to try to come up with some ideas. Any ideas? Seventh? Little House on the Prairie came to mind. The Waltons, sort of, kind of, maybe. But we're talking. Not used to that. No, I'm on now. So, all right. So, but can anybody else think of anything? I mean, anything recent? In fact, in most cases, with Christians, they're usually portrayed very negatively in the news media, on television shows, just generally in our culture. Why is that? Unfortunately, a lot of it's our fault. Yes, they misunderstand what we're saying. Yes, a lot of times they purposely twist what we're saying. But the word hypocrisy, the word fake, the word televangelist doesn't help either. But we've done a lot. Our passage today actually talks about this. From 3,000 years ago, they were doing the same things in ancient Israel. Ecclesiastes 5, 1-7, is basically an indictment of exactly what I was just talking about, hypocrisy and in religion. And you know what that brings? Frustration with religion. Because people, I honestly believe, people really do want genuineness in spirituality, genuineness in people. Unfortunately, they're not getting it a lot of times from us. Ecclesiastes 5, 1-7. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen, rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few. As dreams come when there are many cares, so the speech of a fool when there are many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay in fulfilling it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to vow than to make a vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at you, at what you say, and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, stand in awe of God. What I want to challenge you guys to do tonight is the exact opposite of what our culture perceives us as, is to be genuine and engage in God-centered worship. What I'm going to talk you through, basically, in the time we have together, is what is God-centered worship, first and foremost. Then, from the passage, why you should engage in God-centered worship. And lastly, how can we do it? First, the what. What you need to do to engage in God-centered worship is embrace sincerity in God's presence, also known as what we a lot of times call worship. Worship's a much bigger concept, and your service. This is actually found in the first 3 verses, where it goes through and talks about basically talking too quickly, saying things for God, and specifically, the key phrase that we need to look at is in the very first verse, rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. In that culture, the primary way they worshiped God was through the temple. They offered sacrifices. They would go up there, and there were some mandatory ones. In fact, just a few weeks ago, our Jewish friends had Yom Kippur. That used to be one of the major sacrifices. Obviously, they don't do sacrifices now, but that would have been one of the major festivals. That was the Day of Atonement, when they would make their primary sacrifice for their sins. But there was many other ones. There was voluntary ones. And just like we are, they had a tendency to miss the purpose. They thought that they basically could do whatever they wanted and still basically get away with anything they wanted. And as long as they offered the right sacrifice at the right time, they were good. God was fine with them. The problem was that's not the case. There's a classic example of this in 1 Samuel 15. King Saul had just become king, and he was ordered by God directly through the prophet Samuel to take care of something. The Amalekites had persecuted the Jews during the wilderness and attacked them. In fact, if you remember the story about Joshua and basically Joshua fighting this battle, and that Moses had to pray and that they would win if they held his hands, that whole story. That was the Amalekites. They were a very nasty lot, and God basically commanded Saul, take care of them. You're to go out there and you're to kill all of them. You're not to bring back any spoil. You're to totally destroy everything. Well, King Saul, like us a lot of times, decided he only wanted to do part of what God wanted. He decided, okay, it's a good idea to bring back the animals. Well, not a good idea. The prophet Samuel basically comes up to him at the end of this story and says, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. God told you directly not to do this. And he basically, what he does is he confronts him and gives a significant principle that the Israelites needed to know. It's in 1 Samuel 15:22. To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. Your heart has to be right for things to matter. Saul's excuse, okay, I'm going to bring this stuff back to sacrifice to God, didn't mean anything because he had disobeyed God in the process. Okay. If our attitudes aren't right, isn't that going to be a problem? How many times do we take God on our terms? We only want it when it's convenient for us, when it makes us feel good. I know for me it's a lot of the time, because it's much more convenient. But unfortunately, that's not what God wants. I know for myself, a lot of times I have trouble specifically. Remember, they worship by the sacrifices in the temple. We don't do that. But we do come together for what we call worship. It comes in a variety of forms. I know for myself, I struggle quite a bit with worship in the sense of music. I love music. It's one of my favorite things to listen to. It's funny, as analytical as I am, music actually touches me a lot more. I learn a lot more from music. One of the problems I have with worship is it hits me too much. It becomes too much of an emotion. I'm not thinking about it. My motivation for doing it is wrong. It's because it makes me feel good. It's because it makes me feel close to God. Well, if my attitude isn't right, if my heart isn't right, that's not true worship. A guy named William Temple actually laid out a good definition. And again, worship is much broader. We tended to segment worship as the singing we do on Sunday morning. Worship is actually much bigger than that. It includes prayer, it includes what we're doing now, it includes a lot of other things. But William Temple, he was actually the head of the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury in the last century, actually the century before last, sorry, I keep forgetting, 2000. But it was in the late 1800s. So he gave a definition of worship that I found that I thought was really good, because it really epitomizes what we as Christians need to do. For worship is a submission of all of our nature to God. It is the quickening of conscience by His holiness, the nourishment of mind with His truth, the purifying of imagination by His beauty, the opening of the heart to His love, and the surrender of will to His purpose. And all of this gathered up in adoration, the most selfless emotion of which our nature is capable, and therefore the chief remedy for that self-centeredness which is our original sin and the source of all actionable sin. Self-centeredness. They had it, we had it. In order for you to truly engage and come into God's presence through prayer, through what we call worship, you have to surrender yourself. In fact, the actual core of all Christianity, Christian life, in order to grow spiritually at all, you have to surrender your will. Ultimately, the process of becoming more Christ-like is learning to give up control, and give up control to God. But if you do, I'm assuming people here, you're here on Wednesday nights, there's a lot of other things you can do. I'm assuming that you guys do want to experience God in a significant sense. Learn to submit. I've been a Christian for a long time. I've been walking as a Christian since my senior year of college in 1990. That's a long time. I still struggle with this every single day. In fact, it's funny, in preparing this message, I started thinking about, okay, this is for a class. I'm trying to finish this degree. I'm thinking about, okay, what does the professor want from this and everything else? And I just had to check myself. I finally had to just set it down, what I was working on, and pray. I said, Lord, this is about you. It's about something more significant than a grade I'm going to get or anything else. It's about helping people understand, helping myself grow in this area, which is probably one of the hardest areas I've ever had to grow in. The second thing you need to embrace sincerity in is in your service. We can see this in basically Ecclesiastes 4 through 7, the beginning of verse 7, where it talks about making vows. We don't make vows very often, do we? Other than at a marriage ceremony, generally. It's not a common thing we do. It's not something in our culture that's very, that we would relate to very well. Well, I'm going to give you a real simple definition of what their vows were. Basically, well, there's the proper definition. The proper definition was they were grateful to God, so they wanted to do something for God. That's the good definition of it. The bad definition, the one that the writer of Ecclesiastes is really upset about, was basically, I get into trouble, okay? I need help. Okay, I'm going to go make a vow. God's going to get me out of this problem. See where there's a slight problem with that? We have a good example in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, actually, Genesis 28, of Jacob. The context of this in Genesis 28 is that Jacob had just basically swindled his brother Esau. Remember that story? You remember that story? And basically, what his mother had done, his mother had tricked his dad into sending him off to find a wife, and to relatives far away. Mainly because Esau was probably going to kill him. So, get him out of town fast. On the travel up there, Jacob knows he's in kind of in trouble. So, he decides to talk to God about this. This is verses 20 to 22 in Genesis 28. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. You see what he's doing there? Nothing like trying to bribe God. That's not what true service is. That's what the writer of Ecclesiastes is so frustrated with. He has no use for it. And I have no use for this. It's the height of hubris. It's the height of ridiculousness. You're trying to control God by something you do. This is an area for myself that is really hard for me because I've been involved in ministry for quite a while. School, for quite a number of years. It's very easy to lose sight of why you're doing things. Very easy. And I know for myself, I have to take a check all the time. And, really just evaluate what my motivation is. Why am I doing something? You could be doing something you could be doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, and it's actually sin. And I found myself doing that many times in my Christian walk. And I think the main thing I've learned throughout that process is to keep evaluating things, keep looking at my life, asking the question, why? Why do I do things? What am I getting out of this? You know what I'm saying? Is God really centrally focused in my life at this point? A guy named Richard Foster, actually, he wrote a book called Celebration of Discipline. It's a good book. I've read parts of it. But I found a quote from him, from that book, where he talks about service, and he does a contrast between biblical service and self-service. And I'd like to read that for you because I think it really lays out the differences, motivationally and practically, between the two. Self-righteous service comes through human effort. True service comes from a relationship with the divine other deep inside. Self-righteous service is impressed with the big deal. True service finds it almost impossible to distinguish the small from the large service. Self-righteous service requires external rewards. True service rests contented in hiddenness. Self-righteous service is highly concerned about results. True service is free of the need to calculate results. Self-righteous service picks and chooses whom to serve. True service is indiscriminate in its ministry. Self-righteous service is affected by moods and whims. True service ministers simply and faithfully because there is a need. Self-righteous service is temporary. True service is a lifestyle. Self-righteous service is without sensitivity. It insists on meeting the need even when to do so would be destructive. True service can withhold the service as freely as perform it. Self-service fractures community. True service, on the other hand, builds community. Do you see a common thread between the contrasts? In self-service, it's about me. In true service, you're keeping your eyes focused on someone else, that being God. Unfortunately, as I said, this is the hardest thing to do in the Christian life, is to stay focused on this. I guess the thing that helps me is I just keep looking at what I'm doing and asking myself the question over and over. Is there a motivation that I have that's not about God? It doesn't always help because sometimes I get wrapped up in service or wrapped up in worship or wrapped up in the cares of this world, and I don't remember that. It's amazing how I can go for long periods of time walking with God, allowing Him to have control. But what ends up happening is almost like in an instant, things flip. I'm in control. I've seen God work miraculous things, even to get me back here, to have me sitting here. God worked out all the details. But you know something? About a month ago, I went through a crisis at work, and I forgot all about it. It took God slapping me upside the head, basically, and saying, Joel, look at what I've done for you, to realize it wasn't about me. But it's hard. I think that the one thing I want to challenge you for in this is just keep striving for it. Keep really looking to be sincere in these things. On another level, I really think that what will happen too is as people in the world look at us and they see sincerity, they see this selfless attitude, the self-sacrificial attitude, like what we did in the park. You know, about a month or so ago, people couldn't believe that we would just give out things to them, especially at church. It amazed them. That's good. We need to keep doing more of that because the world is not used to that. Everybody has an angle. Everybody has something they're looking to gain out of it. We should not be that. We should just be simply looking to help. So that's the what. You need to embrace sincerity in God's presence, when you're in God's presence, and you need to embrace sincerity in your service. Now the next question is, why? Well, insincerity in worship is futile and dangerous. You see the futility in Ecclesiastes, the very end of Ecclesiastes 5:2. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be with you. we get out of that is basically three things. The contrast there is between the temporal, the temporary, things on the earth, and the eternal. God is completely different than us. Why would you think that you could fool him? Okay, these people were going to the temple with their sacrifices. They knew where they were faking it. Or they were making vows that they had no intention to fulfill. Why would you think you can get away with that? It doesn't make, for me, it doesn't make any sense. It seems to be a self-delusion in some senses. Another thing is that if you are insincere, ultimately, you're going to miss the point of what worship truly is. To gain anything out of worship, you have to surrender. You have to surrender yourself to God, so He can come, so He can meet you. If you don't do that, it's kind of like just like going through the motions. Why would you want to do it? I know for myself that if I wasn't absolutely convinced that God exists and that I have a relationship with Him, I wouldn't be talking to you tonight. Because there's other things I could be doing that I probably would enjoy a little bit more than that, because speaking in front of people makes me very, 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 very nervous. As much as I've done it a lot, but it makes me extremely nervous. There are other things I would love to do, but you know something? I'm willing to give up what I want for what God wants. Again, that's tough. And we're not going to be perfect at it. It's a constant process. Another thing I think that this points out is, this is a practical thing. When you're talking about, especially service, okay? There's a lot of times that people, and this gets down to something really practical, people get involved in a church because in some ways it's fairly easy. Churches need a lot of people to do stuff, right? There's always something to do. You know, there's things, there's all sorts of jobs that you have to do. Well, if somebody needs their ego stroked, it's really easy sometimes for people to kind of slip in, and they may even be good people. I'm not really impugning their thing, but if they have, let's say, a self-image problem and they really want to have their ego boosted, well, they start getting involved. They're doing stuff. And people say, hey, you're doing a great job. You're doing this, you're doing that. It's kind of the big fish in a little pond syndrome. That misses the point, again, of what service is for God. Service is, again, like experiencing God's presence. It's about changing us. It's about helping us to become the person we need to be. That person's missing out on the boat, missing the boat completely. An even more important thing to look at is insincerity in worship is very dangerous, actually. In the very end of verse 6, this is very scary. This is talking about not fulfilling vows. Basically, you're not doing what you're saying you're doing. Your motivations are wrong for why you're doing it. And the author says, why should God be angry at what you say, specifically the vow that you just made, and destroy the work of your hands? God disciplines His children. In fact, in Proverbs 3:11-12, this is laid out very, very well. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, as a father the son He delights in. If you don't discipline a child, they're going to grow up to be, I don't know what completely undisciplined. They're going to grow up to be something, a monster. But even if you just don't discipline them consistently, they are not going to grow up to be a mature person. God wants you to be mature, so He's going to discipline you. But I know when I was a child, I was a very strong-willed child. I know that's probably very, very hard to believe, but no, I was extremely strong-willed. My mother still has plenty of stories about me as a child. But the one thing I learned really quick is there were certain boundaries that if I crossed, the ramifications were I did not want
my mother, she was the primary disciplinarian in our family, but there were just certain things that I knew that if I crossed that boundary with her, not a good thing. I really didn't want to do that. I learned really quick. I might push the boundary, but I would never cross that boundary because the discipline was too severe and I didn't want to pay that cost. God's the same way. He's not going to... Now, this is where the difference between punishment for sinners, non-Christians, and Christians differ. Non-Christians will be punished in the end, eternally, ultimately, in hell, but for their sins. God's not punishing you for your sin when He disciplines you. Sin is bad for you. He is punishing you to teach you a lesson so that you won't do it anymore. See the difference? Okay. But the farther we go, and the worse we are, the more God's going to discipline you. Strongly, hardly. And you just don't want to go there. You just don't want to go there because He loves you so much, He's not going to let it go. He's going to keep coming at you, keep coming at you, keep coming at you, until either you change or He has to do something really drastic. I've seen people where He's done things incredibly drastic in their lives, and they still didn't get it. And it's tragic because all you have to do is acknowledge it and surrender to Him. But there still is that kind of discipline out there. And that should be a motivation to not be insincere in worship. Now that you've seen the what, that we want to engage, in sincere, we want to be sincere in God's presence and our service, that the ramifications for insincerity are very bad, and we don't want to do it, because either it's totally futile or it's just like dangerous. Now, we need to talk about the how. What we need to do, what you need to do, what I need to do all the time is we need to refocus your attitudes, my attitudes, about God's presence in your service. The first thing we need to do is we need to refocus your attitude, and I'm including myself in that door, about God's presence from being self-centered to God-centered. The key to understanding this passage is the very last line. Therefore, stand in awe of God. Some of the versions says fear God. But I think stand in awe is better. We need to recognize God for who He is and align ourselves accordingly. Like I said before, we need to evaluate ourselves. What I want everybody to do, and it needs to become a discipline for all of us, is to start looking at your life and looking for I in there. The more I is in there, the worse things are going to be. We need to constantly be opening ourselves up to God and having Him reveal things to us, where we are keeping our focus on ourselves and not on Him. Once you do that, what you need to do is confess your sin. And that I focus, that self-centeredness is sin. You confess it. Confess it is simply acknowledging to God that what you're doing is sin, and then asking Him to change you. That is the process by which you refocus yourself, and you turn yourself from being self-centered to God-centered. When it comes to worship, what we call worship, being in God's presence, what it means we need to be constantly doing is looking at ourselves and asking ourselves, is this really about me stepping into the presence of God, or is it about something else? And when we realize that, like I said, confess it and move on.
The second thing you need to do is we need to refocus your attitude, my attitude, all of our attitudes about your service from a self-seeking attitude to a God-centered, self-sacrificial attitude. Again, evaluate the eyes. Look at your focus. Is your focus on what I'm doing, what I want, what makes me feel good? Anytime that happens, again, it's sin. You need to confess it. The good thing about this one, the last one was a little harder, because we're really not in God's presence. We won't be in God's presence till either the rapture or we die. We have a veil there, because we really aren't, because God is there in one sense, but He's not here in His glory. We don't get to see His glory. The one good thing about our service is, guess what? We have a great model who modeled it perfectly. Jesus. The God of the universe became a man, spent 33 years, died a horrific death on the cross, in the ultimate act of self-sacrifice. And it wasn't so much the death that was the problem. It was the fact that He had sin, which is utterly repugnant to His nature, was willing to take that sin on Himself. We can look at the Gospels. In fact, I would challenge everybody to look at the Gospels and see how Jesus lived. Yes, He was God. Yes, He was perfect. But He was also a man. In fact, I believe it's Hebrews that says that He encountered everything we did except sin. So we can look at how He interacted with people, how He served people, how He loved people, and get a great example. What I want to challenge you to do is to do that. Use Jesus as your model. Evaluate your life in your service, in your actions with other people, in the people in your neighborhood, that Brad's talking about. Is it about you? Or is it about God? And whenever, and it's going to happen all the time, whenever you recognize that it's you getting in the way, that's what you want, step back, confess it, and move on. In conclusion, what we've seen is basically an imperative in Scripture that we engage in God-centered worship from this passage. We've seen the what, that we embrace sincerity in God's presence and your service. The why, that insincerity in worship is futile and dangerous. The how, that we need to refocus your attitudes about God's presence and your service. I've talked about the confession and a bunch of stuff, but I never want to walk away without giving you some practical steps to take. What I want to challenge everybody to do is twofold. And it's the two areas we talked about. It's experiencing God's presence, and secondarily, serving God. The first thing I want to challenge everybody to do is during the worship service next Sunday, take a few seconds, pardon me, Rick, out while you're singing. Stop. Pray to God that He'll reveal to you anything that is getting in the way of you being in His presence. Any self-centered attitude, any self-centered motivation, anything that could get in the way. If you reveal something to you, confess it and move on. But I really want to challenge you, and I'm going to be doing this myself next Sunday, because this is something, as I said, that I don't have locked down. I'm not even close to having locked down. It's something I have to deal with all the time. I want to challenge you to do that. Secondarily, what I want to challenge you to do is I've already talked about Jesus as a perfect example. What I'd like for you to do in your time of devotion, time of Bible study, whatever you want to call it, people call it quiet time, people call it devotions, people call it whatever, it doesn't really matter what you call it. In your time with God, what I want you to do is twofold. Again, pray that God will reveal areas of service that your motivations aren't right. But secondarily, I want to challenge you to consider looking at the Gospels and reading carefully what Jesus, not so much what Jesus said, but how He acted towards people. Ask yourself what His motivations were
for people. And then put those into practice. It's a long-term process. And as I said, I don't have this down at all. But if you never start this, you're never going to be the person God created you to be. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I want to thank you for this time. I thank you that we can come into your presence, that we can serve you, and we can do those in the way that you intended, that it would be self-sacrificial, it would be truly God-centered, and that you would be glorified throughout the entire process. In your Son's name.